Imagine for a second, right, that there is a literal digital skeleton key just sitting on a server somewhere right now.
Yeah, we are not talking about some, like, generic hacking tool you'd find on the dark web.
Exactly. I mean, we are talking about a piece of technology so incredibly powerful, so unbelievably adept at reading code, that it finds the deepest, darkest, unseen vulnerabilities in literally any software on the planet.
And the engineers who built it are, they're absolutely terrified of what they've created.
Right. They've essentially locked it in a digital vault. It's this new AI model from Anthropic called Claude Mythos Preview, and it is considered such a catastrophic security risk that they have strictly banned it from the public.
You absolutely must stick around until the end of this show to hear the terrifying and fascinating details of this digital skeleton key, because, I mean, once this gets out, it literally rewrites the rules of global cybersecurity.
We are Mike and Abby, and welcome to Daily World Podcasts.
Forget everything you know about boring news. We are taking the wildest, most impactful stories that hit the planet today and breaking them down so you don't have to.
Whether you are on a long drive, crushing a workout, or just feeling a little bored, we're here to keep you updated with the world and make your next hour incredibly interesting.
We are kicking things off with a literal doomsday clock that just stopped at the 11th hour.
Yeah.
Wait until you hear how close we just came to absolute destruction.
Yeah, I mean, we have to take you back to Tuesday, and we need to, meticulously break down the timeline here because the tension in the Middle East wasn't just elevated.
Apocalyptic, it really was.
It felt like we were watching the prologue to a world war. President Trump issues this ultimatum that, frankly, reads like the climax of a geopolitical thriller.
Right.
He set this hard, undeniable, highly publicized deadline, 8:00 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, and the demand was totally non-negotiable. Iran had to immediately, unconditionally open the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is, the ultimate geopolitical choke point. Just to visualize this, right? The strait is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point.
Oh, wow, that is tiny.
Yeah, and the actual shipping lanes that those massive supertankers use, only 2 miles wide in each direction.
So it's basically a needle's eye.
Exactly. And Iran had essentially clamped it shut, just suffocating a full fifth of the world's daily oil supply. The global economy was essentially, well, having an asthma attack.
Right, but it wasn't just the deadline that was scary. It was the sheer scale of the threat attached to it. The rhetoric was completely unprecedented.
Yeah, tell them what he posted.
So the president went on Truth Social and posted, and we are quoting this verbatim here, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again."
I mean, that is just a chilling string of words.
Right, he wasn't just threatening targeted military strikes. He explicitly threatened to obliterate Iranian power plants, to destroy every single bridge in the country by midnight.
Every single bridge.
Yeah, every bridge. And to enact, quote, complete and total regime change. He stated it would be one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world.
And, the military maneuvering actually matched the rhetoric. The U.S. had already launched over 90 airstrikes on Iran's Karg Island.
Wait, let's contextualize Karg Island really quick because it's not just some random rock in the Persian Gulf, right?
Far from it. It is the beating heart of Iran's economy. It's this massive, sprawling oil export hub. We are talking about a facility capable of moving up to 7 million barrels of oil in a single day.
Which means 90 airstrikes, there's essentially a systematic dismantling of their primary revenue stream?
Exactly. The U.S. was actively prepping the zone for a massive, sustained, nationwide bombing campaign. Carrier strike groups were in position. U.S. forces across the entire Middle Eastern theater were just locked and loaded.
Literally just watching the clock tick toward 8:00 p.m.
And if you look at the domestic response inside Iran, it paints a picture of pure state-mobilized desperation. State television was broadcasting nonstop.
Right. Iranian officials were actively, publicly calling on their own citizens, students, local athletes, university professors, to go out to these critical infrastructure sites and act as human shields.
Yes, they actually dubbed it Power Plant Day.
Wait, are you serious? Power Plant Day?
I am dead serious. They were broadcasting footage of dozens of Iranian civilians literally linking arms, forming human chains around these massive electrical grids and power generation facilities.
The psychology of that is staggering. I mean, put yourself in that physical space. You are standing on the concrete perimeter of an industrial power plant.
Yeah.
It's 7:45 p.m. You are staring up at the night sky, fully aware that a superpower has explicitly stated this exact GPS coordinate is about to be turned into a crater.
And your government's defense strategy is your physical body.
Pause for a second and ask yourself, what would you do in this situation? If you were an everyday civilian facing an 8 p.m. deadline of total infrastructure annihilation, would you actually go form a human chain around a power plant?
I mean, it completely overrides the biological imperative to survive, right?
Right.
It speaks to either an unimaginable level of state coercion or just a deeply entrenched culture of martyrdom that Western analysts, continuously struggle to quantify.
Absolutely. But then we get the twist. The tension is just unbearable. 6.00 p.m. passes, 6.15 p.m. passes. The entire globe is just holding its breath.
Right.
And then at exactly 6.32 p.m. Eastern Time, literally just 88 minutes before the 8:00 p.m. deadline, the threat is instantly lifted.
The 11th hour. The absolute final moments before the launch codes are executed.
The White House announces a 2-week ceasefire, and the architect of this pause wasn't the UN, it wasn't the EU, it was Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif.
Wait, really? Pakistan?
Yes, he somehow works the back channels in Islamabad at the very last minute and successfully mediates this massive de-escalation.
Which, I mean, makes geopolitical sense when you look at the board. Pakistan shares a massive border with Iran, but they also rely heavily on U.S. economic and military ties.
Right.
Sharif essentially played the ultimate neutral broker because a radioactive fallout economically or literally right on his border would just collapse his own country.
But the details of this ceasefire are where the narrative goes from terrifying to completely surreal.
Oh, it gets wild.
President Trump goes online and proclaims that Iran has presented a, quote, workable 10-point proposal. He calls it a basis for negotiation. But when you actually read the mechanics of these 10 points that Iran is putting on the table...
It is flat-out geopolitical extortion.
Exactly. Let's break down the exact demands because they are audacious.
So first, the core issue. The Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
The U.S. demanded it be opened unconditionally, right?
Yeah.
Iran's 10-point plan says, okay, well, we will open it, but safe passage will be entirely managed by the Iranian armed forces.
Which completely negates the U.S. objective. The U.S. brings an armada to the Persian Gulf to secure international shipping, and Iran's concession is demanding international recognition that they are the sole maritime police of the strait.
And they want to monetize it. Point number 7 of their proposal demands that Iran and Oman be allowed to jointly charge maritime transit fees on the commercial vessels passing through.
Oh my God. So they choke off a fifth of the world's oil, bring the planet to the brink of war, and their proposed solution is to install a toll booth and charge the cargo ships they were just holding hostage.
Precisely. And the list of demands accelerates from there. They demand total international recognition of their uranium enrichment program.
Of course.
They demand a complete, formalized withdrawal of all U.S. combat forces from the entire region. They demand the immediate lifting of all U.S. sanctions and UN Security Council resolutions.
And the wildest part to me is the indemnification clause.
Oh yeah, explain that one.
They explicitly demanded infrastructure indemnification. They essentially want the U.S. to foot the bill for the damages inflicted on their civilian and military infrastructure during the Karg Island airstrikes.
Look at the power dynamics here. It is fascinating.
It is an analytical goldmine. If we look at this objectively, this 10-point plan is like a hostage negotiation where the hostage taker, completely surrounded by SWAT teams, is suddenly demanding to become the CEO of the police department, full immunity, and a cash settlement for the door the cops just kicked in.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
Right. They are negotiating from the crosshairs, yet demanding total control of the waterway, cash compensation, and foreign military withdrawal.
And yet, the Trump administration officially categorized this as a workable basis on which to negotiate. The brinkmanship actually resulted in scheduled diplomacy. The first official talks are slated for this Friday in Islamabad.
So the physical bombs didn't drop, but the financial shockwaves absolutely shattered the Richter scale. You will not believe how Wall Street reacted to this 11th hour deal.
Oh, if you want a masterclass in how algorithmic high-frequency trading operates, you just have to look at the market charts from Tuesday evening. The whiplash was incredibly violent.
It was a $1 trillion pivot in the span of minutes. Before 6.32 p.m., Wall Street was mathematically pricing in World War III. The fear premium on crude was just staggering. Oil prices had spiked to $119 a barrel over the last few weeks.
Because the market hates uncertainty, but it hates a closed Strait of Hormuz even more. You literally cannot reroute those very large crude carriers around the Cape of Good Hope without completely destroying the margins on the oil.
Not to mention the massive spike in maritime insurance premiums.
Exactly. But the very millisecond that the word ceasefire hit the Bloomberg terminals, before human traders could even read the full headline, the algorithms triggered a massive automated sell-off.
The bottom completely fell out of the oil market. Oil prices collapsed by roughly 15% in a matter of hours.
Wait, 15%? That is huge.
Yes, Brent crude, which is the international benchmark, plummeted over 13.4%, slamming down to around $94.59 to $94.74 a barrel. The U.S. benchmark crude dropped all the way to $95.79.
Wow, it was one of the single most violent daily price corrections in modern market history. The fear premium just evaporated.
And while the commodities traders were dumping oil, the equities market absolutely exploded into the stratosphere.
Right, the relief rally triggered this massive short squeeze. The Dow Jones Industrial Average surged over 1,300 points. At its peak, it was up 1,383 points in a single session.
The S&P 500 leaped between 2.6% and 2.7%. The NASDAQ rallied 3.3%. The capital flowed directly back into tech and consumer goods now that the threat of hyperinflated energy costs was off the table.
And it was a global sigh of relief, really. Japan's Nikkei jumped a massive 5%. South Korea's Kospi soared an incredible 5.9%.
The entire interconnected global financial nervous system was essentially throwing a ticker tape parade because the civilization-ending war was put on a 14-day hold.
But, you know, we have to look at the underlying mechanics here because I think the market reaction is fundamentally disconnected from the geopolitical reality.
I totally agree. They are pricing this in as a resolution. It is not a resolution. It is a 2-week pause.
Exactly.
The terms of that 10-point proposal are highly contested. Trump himself already went on record saying the Farsi version of the proposal regarding uranium enrichment was, quote, fraudulent.
Yeah, the translation discrepancies alone could collapse the Islamabad talks on day one.
Look at it purely mechanically. This isn't a cooled engine. It's like a commercial spring-loaded pressure valve on a massive industrial boiler, right? The pressure is still at critical mass. The valve just released a tiny burst of steam to prevent a localized explosion, but the boiler is still red hot. If Friday's talks break down, that valve snaps shut, and we are right back to the 8 p.m. Doomsday scenario, but with even less diplomatic runway.
And the institutional giants completely recognize that risk. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, dropped his annual letter to shareholders right in the middle of this, and his analysis was incredibly stark.
What did he say?
He essentially bypassed the daily ticker tape and warned that the macroeconomic fundamentals are deeply compromised. He stated clearly that this geopolitical friction, even if it's currently paused, will continue to fuel massive supply-side inflation and force central banks to keep interest rates higher for longer.
And that skepticism is entirely justified because while the suits on Wall Street are celebrating, the actual reality on the ground and in cyberspace is an absolute nightmare. Wait until you hear what is happening right under our noses.
Yeah, when you look closely at the diplomatic fine print, the word ceasefire has a gigantic glaring asterisk next to it.
A massive asterisk, because while the U.S. and Iran have agreed to pause the direct bombing of each other's sovereign territory, Israel made their operational parameters crystal clear.
Right. They agreed to the pause with Iran, but they did not agree to a pause in Lebanon.
Exactly. The regional proxy war is still completely hot. The Israeli ground invasion into southern Lebanon is still actively pounding Hezbollah, which is fundamentally an Iranian-allied, Iranian-funded militia.
In just the last few days, totally ignoring the U.S.-Iran pause, Israel systematically destroyed at least 70 Hezbollah weapons storage facilities.
Wow. 70 facilities.
Yeah, and they successfully targeted and killed the group's intelligence chief. Over 50 people have been reportedly killed in Lebanon, and Israeli airstrikes hit central Beirut on Wednesday without any prior warning.
So it's this incredibly complex geopolitical paradox. You have diplomats packing their bags for peace talks in Islamabad, while simultaneously the proxy forces of those exact same nations are firing rockets in Lebanon.
That's messy.
But if you think the physical battlefield is complex, it is nothing compared to the shadow war escalating in the digital realm.
Oh, this is where the concept of a ceasefire completely breaks down. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, just dropped a massive urgent advisory that should, frankly, be front page news everywhere.
CISA is reporting that state-sponsored Iranian hackers are actively exploiting software vulnerabilities in U.S. water and energy providers.
They are already inside the network.
Specifically, they are targeting what are known as programmable logic controllers, or PLCs. And we really need to explain what these are, because they are the invisible backbone of modern civilization.
Let's break down the mechanics here.
Yeah.
A PLC isn't like a laptop sitting on a desk in an office. A PLC is a ruggedized industrial hardware computer. It runs localized logic code.
Right.
It is the literal brain that tells a physical mechanism what to do. It tells a massive steel valve at a municipal water treatment plant to open 50% or close entirely. It tells the regional power grid exactly how to route high-voltage electricity to prevent a transformer from melting down.
And CISA specifically noted they are exploiting PLCs manufactured by Rockwell Automation and Allen Bradley, which are ubiquitous in American infrastructure.
Yeah. If a state-sponsored hacker gets root access to a PLC, they aren't just stealing credit card data or reading emails.
No, they can physically manipulate critical infrastructure. They can change the chemical mix in your city's drinking water. They can shut down the turbines.
And we know this playbook. This is exactly the architecture of the Stuxnet virus over a decade ago, which the U.S. and Israel allegedly used to physically spin Iranian uranium centrifuges so fast they tore themselves apart.
Right, but now the vector is reversed. And CISA's advisory isn't theoretical. They stated these vulnerabilities are actively being exploited as we speak.
It completely redefines the boundaries of warfare. To compound that fear, the FBI concurrently released a massive warning to state and local law enforcement detailing an elevated threat posed by the Iranian government to physical targets right here in the United States.
Yeah, they are actively tracking threats against military and government personnel, Jewish and Israeli institutions, and Iranian dissidents living on U.S. soil.
It makes the term ceasefire feel almost archaic. A ceasefire implies a total cessation of hostilities. But the hostilities haven't ceased. They've simply shifted domains.
They moved from the airspace over Kharg Island to the servers running the American power grid.
And while the intelligence community is fighting that shadow war, the political ecosystem in Washington, D.C. is completely melting down over the president's rhetoric. The domestic fallout from the whole civilization will die post is just explosive.
We have a totally fractured political reality, and we're just looking at the raw statements here to report what is happening. Over 70 Democratic lawmakers have officially signed on to demands for Trump's immediate removal from office over the threat.
The language coming out of Capitol Hill is really intense. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries released a formal statement calling the president's actions completely unhinged.
And Senator Jack Reed went further, stating the threats were comparable to genocide and categorized them as a criminal act.
And it isn't strictly down party lines either. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene, historically a staunch Trump ally, publicly called for his removal, referring to the civilization threat as evil and madness.
But if you look at the other side of the aisle, you have prominent Republicans staunchly defending the hardline approach, arguing that the brinkmanship is exactly what yielded the diplomatic opening.
Right. Senator Lindsey Graham urged everyone to, quote, kick the tires on the deal, suggesting the intense pressure is the only language that works.
Exactly. And Representative Pete Sessions praised the president, stating he chose to deter aggression and lead with strength. So we're just laying out what both sides are saying here, because the polarization is just unreal.
So you have a nation sitting on a nice edge, geopolitically, economically, and domestically, all arguing over whether the threat of annihilation was a masterstroke of negotiation or a criminal offense.
And that level of polarization isn't just restricted to politics. It is bleeding heavily into culture. Because while the global stage is dealing with a geopolitical earthquake, the cultural stage just had a massive earthquake of its own.
Oh, yeah.
A major international music festival was just completely wiped out because of one single artist. You've got to hear this.
This is a massive story about the collision of pop culture, international borders, and systemic consequences. This idea of an underlying foundation completely collapsing while people are just looking at the surface, it actually perfectly mirrors what just happened in London.
Yeah. Ye, the artist formerly known as Kanye West, just single-handedly caused the total cancellation of a massive UK music festival.
It is a phenomenal case study in financial and cultural liability. You is scheduled to be the exclusive solo headliner for all 3 days of the Wireless Festival in London this July.
And we really have to emphasize the scale of Wireless. This isn't like a boutique indie show. This is a massive, globally recognized event. Tens of thousands of people.
Previous headliners are absolute titans: Drake, Nicki Minaj.
Right. And the pre-sale tickets for Ye's three-day run had already completely sold out. Millions of pounds in revenue were already locked in.
But the UK government completely stepped in and slammed the door shut. The UK Home Office officially blocked Ye from entering the country.
The mechanics of this are fascinating. He applied for an electronic travel authorization, or an ETA. This is the new digital system the UK uses for visa-free short stays.
Right.
The Home Office reviewed his file and flat out denied the ETA.
And the official bureaucratic justification is striking. They stated his presence is, quote, not conducive to the public good.
Not conducive to the public good. That is the most polite, profoundly British way of saying, you are a systemic liability and you are absolutely not welcome on our soil.
Exactly. And the justification for this rests entirely on his highly publicized, deeply documented history of anti-Semitism.
The Home Office, backed by various politicians, pointed to a very specific, escalating string of incidents. It wasn't just one offhand comment.
No. It was his previous, explicit public praise for Adolf Hitler. It was his documented associations with prominent neo-Nazi figures. And specifically, it was a track he released in 2025, literally titled Heil Hitler, compounded by his decision to sell swastika-branded T-shirts on his Yeezy website.
The backlash within the UK was immediate and severe. 3 highly prominent UK imams publicly urged the festival organizers to cancel the event, stating that providing a massive platform to Ye would actively normalize hate speech within their communities.
And that public pressure is what triggers the financial cascade. When religious leaders and politicians start denouncing an event, the corporate sponsors panic.
Which is the absolute financial death knell for any large-scale festival. You cannot run an event of this magnitude purely on ticket sales. You need the massive corporate infrastructure.
Heavyweights like Pepsi, Diageo, and Anheuser-Busch InBev all immediately pulled their sponsorships. They invoked moral clause breaches and completely withdrew their funding.
Without the sponsors, the logistical scaffolding of the festival just collapses. The organizers had literally no choice. They didn't just drop Ye. They completely canceled the entire 3-day wireless festival.
Tens of thousands of fans are now being issued automatic refunds. If you go to the wireless website right now, the entire infrastructure is wiped blank except for a start cancellation notice.
And what elevates this from a music industry story to a major political story is that the highest levels of the UK government actively weighed in to support the cancellation.
Right. Prime Minister Keir Starmer took to X and publicly backed the Home Office ban. He stated flatly, Kanye West should never have been invited to headline wireless. He reinforced that the government will not stop in their fight to defeat the poison of anti-Semitism,
which forced a massive, highly calculated response from Ye's camp. He didn't just fire off a defensive tweet. He orchestrated a very expensive, very traditional public relations pivot.
He took out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal.
A print ad in the most establishment financial paper in the world.
Yeah. In the ad, he issues a direct apology for his anti-Semitic remarks. But the core of the defense relies on medical attribution.
He claims that his past behavior, the hate speech, the associations, were the direct result of a severe manic episode. And he attributes this episode to a complex combination of bipolar disorder and an undiagnosed traumatic brain injury, a TBI.
He wrote, quote, I am not a Nazi or anti-Semite. I love Jewish people. And he actively offered to meet with members of the Jewish community in person to demonstrate change through his actions.
It thrusts this massive, highly complex debate into the spotlight regarding art, medical accountability, and government intervention. You have a 20-year-old fan who had tickets to the show go on NPR, and his take was fascinating.
What did he say?
He said he fully supports the right of individuals to boycott the show or sponsors to pull their money if they are offended, but he argued that a sovereign government shouldn't have the unilateral power to outright ban an artist from entering a country purely based on past offensive speech.
Right. It's the friction between the absolute right to free speech and a nation's right to curate its borders against individuals they deem culturally toxic.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, go to the comments and tell us, do you think a government should have the power to ban an artist based on their past statements, or does that cross a line into a free speech violation? Tell us what you think.
It is an incredibly polarizing debate, especially when you factor in the medical defense of a brain injury altering a person's fundamental behavior.
And this concept of hidden systemic damage, a deteriorating foundation that dictates outward behavior, actually perfectly connects to a massive medical discovery that was just published, and it is going to rewrite medical textbooks entirely.
This is one of those incredibly rare scientific breakthroughs that completely upends decades of established medical consensus. We are talking about a fundamental re-understanding of multiple sclerosis, or MS.
For decades, the entire medical community operated on one core biological mechanism when it came to treating MS. They understood it primarily as an autoimmune issue attacking the white matter of the brain.
Let's break down the old model first. The focus was almost entirely on demyelination. The myelin is the protective lipid coating wrapped around the axons of nerve cells in the brain's white matter.
The analogy everyone uses is the rubber insulation around a copper electrical wire.
Exactly. In a healthy brain, that insulation allows electrical signals to travel lightning fast. In an MS patient, the immune system gets confused. Autoreactive T cells and B cells breach the blood-brain barrier and actively attack and strip away that myelin insulation.
And when the insulation is gone, the electrical signals misfire, cross-circuit, or degrade completely, which leads to the devastating physical and cognitive symptoms of the disease.
But neuroscientists just published peer-reviewed research that proves the demyelinated model is only half the picture.
They discovered an entirely new, deeply insidious mechanism contributing to the progressive decline in patients.
And it completely shifts the focus from the white matter to the gray matter. They found that the chronic inflammation caused by the disease isn't just stripping the myelin. The chemical reactions from the inflammation, specifically the release of reactive oxygen species and neurotoxins, are actively causing double-strand DNA breaks in the neurons of the cerebral cortex.
Wait, let me make sure I'm explaining this correctly. It damages the actual DNA strands inside the nucleus of the cell.
Yes. The inflammation is highly toxic. It penetrates the nucleus of the gray matter neurons, which are the cells responsible for higher-level cognition, memory, and processing, and it literally fractures their DNA, triggering irreversible cell death.
I want to introduce an analogy here because the mechanical difference is profound. For decades, doctors thought this disease was essentially just stripping the paint off the walls of a house, the myelin.
Yeah.
And pharmaceutical companies have spent billions trying to formulate drugs that stop the paint from peeling or help repaint the walls.
Which are the disease-modifying therapies we have today.
Exactly. But this new discovery shows that while the paint is peeling, the disease is actually flooding the basement and completely rotting the concrete foundation itself, the DNA of the gray matter.
And that is a monumental paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It proves that focusing solely on protecting the myelin and the white matter is biologically insufficient to stop the progressive, long-term cognitive decline of the disease.
It changes the entire approach to finding a cure.
It opens up an entirely new, urgent avenue for pharmacology. Now, researchers have to develop targeted, neuroprotective therapies that specifically cross the blood-brain barrier to shield the gray matter DNA from oxidative stress, completely separate from the immune-suppressing drugs used for the white matter.
It is terrifying to realize we fundamentally misunderstood the disease mechanism for so long, but it is incredibly hopeful for the millions of people affected by MS who now have a path toward more comprehensive treatments.
It's a massive reevaluation of how we categorize and treat populations.
And speaking of categorizing massive populations, the scale of what is happening in the medical field is rivaled only by the logistical undertaking currently happening in India. They are executing a data collection project that is almost impossible to comprehend.
India has officially launched what will undoubtedly be the largest, most complex census operation in human history. They are systematically surveying a population of over 1.4 billion people.
Just the sheer human infrastructure required for that is staggering. How do you even organize a data set of 1.4 billion distinct entries?
They have mobilized an army. They deployed over 3 million government enumerators.
3 million workers.
Yeah. These workers are physically going door to door across massive megacities like Mumbai, up into remote Himalayan villages, across the entire subcontinent. And the massive upgrade here is that for the first time ever, it is a fully digitized process.
Which means they aren't hauling around billions of paper forms.
Right. They're inputting the data directly into synchronized mobile applications linked to national servers, which allows for real-time algorithmic processing of the demographic data.
That's incredible.
But the technology isn't actually the explosive part of this story. It's the specific sociological data they are suddenly demanding.
Yes, because for the first time since 1931, back when India was still under British colonial rule, the central government is officially collecting explicit, highly detailed data on caste.
We need to explain the weight of this. The caste system is a deeply complex hereditary social hierarchy with roots stretching back thousands of years in ancient Hindu scripture. It traditionally divided society into rigid occupational and social strata.
And legally, discrimination based on caste was officially abolished when India adopted its constitution in 1950.
Legally, yes. But sociologically, it remains an incredibly powerful, deeply entrenched mechanism within the social fabric. It dictates marriage, economic mobility, and political power.
And the preliminary survey numbers actively prove how rigid those boundaries still are. Look at this wild statistical data point. 70% of surveyed Indian adults explicitly state that most or all of their close friends belong to their exact same caste.
Wow.
And a significant majority assert that stopping intercaste marriages within their community is very important.
For decades, starting with the 1951 census, the Indian government intentionally avoided asking questions about general caste affiliation. The political philosophy was essentially that if the government stopped officially recognizing and measuring caste, the societal divisions would naturally phase out over time in a modern democracy.
But critics, particularly those from marginalized groups, have aggressively argued that ignoring the data doesn't erase the inequality. It just masks the reality of systemic oppression. You can't fix a disparity you refuse to measure.
Exactly. And by finally collecting this data and digitizing it so it can be algorithmically sorted, it is going to completely reshape the country. India has a massive system of reservations, which is their version of affirmative action quotas for government jobs and university seats.
Right, so if the new digital census reveals that historically marginalized castes make up a significantly larger percentage of the population than currently estimated, the political pressure to completely overhaul and expand those quota algorithms will be immense.
It is a monumental shift in how a nation of 1.4 billion people fundamentally categorizes itself.
It's the ultimate disruption of an established hierarchy.
And we are seeing established hierarchies topple in much smaller but fiercely competitive arenas as well, because the algorithms that dictate academic prestige just triggered an absolute panic in the Ivy League.
Oh man, the U.S. News and World Report law school rankings just dropped, and there is a new king. Stanford Law School has officially overtaken Yale Law School to claim the #1 spot.
Which, to an outsider, might just sound like two billionaires arguing over who has the nicer yacht.
Seriously.
But you have to understand the absolute rigidity of this specific history. Yale Law hasn't just been good. Yale Law has been ranked #1 by U.S. News for 36 consecutive years.
It was considered an immutable law of physics in the academic world. Gravity goes down, light travels fast, and Yale is #1. End of story.
And Stanford just ended that 3.5-decade streak.
The mechanics behind this upset are fascinating because it comes down to how these institutions interact with the ranking algorithms.
Recently, many top law schools, including both Yale and Stanford, actually boycotted the U.S. News rankings, criticizing the methodology for punishing schools that encourage public interest careers over high-paying corporate law.
Right. So U.S. News tweaked their algorithm. They started relying heavily on publicly available data, specifically bar passage rates and post-graduation employment metrics, rather than subjective peer assessment surveys.
And under the new mathematical weightings, Stanford's employment outcomes mathematically edged out Yale's historic prestige.
It just proves that no system, no matter how entrenched, is immune to being disrupted if you change the algorithm. And that perfectly sets the stage for the most terrifying algorithm we have ever seen. Remember that AI we teased at the very beginning?
The one that is literally too dangerous to be released.
Get ready, because here it is.
We need to talk about Anthropic and the shadowy existence of their new model, Claude Mythos Preview.
Look, we talk about artificial intelligence constantly. Society is getting very comfortable with the concept of large language models. We use ChatGPT to draft corporate emails, or we use Midjourney to generate funny images of astronauts riding horses.
But Claude Mythos Preview is not a chatbot. It is something entirely different and, frankly, deeply alarming. Anthropic has essentially built an AI model whose architecture is so hyper-optimized for cybersecurity and code analysis that they are terrified of what happens if it escapes into the wild.
The technical capabilities of this model are staggering. Mythos is insanely capable of finding and exploiting what are known as zero-day vulnerabilities in software.
Let's explain the mechanics of a zero-day, because it is the holy grail of hacking. A zero-day is a critical flaw or backdoor in a piece of code that literally nobody knows about yet, not the cybersecurity community, and critically, not even the original software creator.
Which means there is zero defense against it. There is no patch. It is an open, invisible window into the system.
Traditionally, finding a zero-day requires a human security researcher to spend months agonizingly combing through millions of lines of code, running static analyses, looking for a tiny logical error.
But Claude Mythos doesn't read code like a traditional scanner. Because it's an advanced LLM, it understands the semantic intent of the code. It can instantly ingest the entire architecture of an operating system, recognize complex, multi-layered logical patterns, and pinpoint those hidden backdoors in seconds. It acts as an instant, autonomous, digital skeleton key.
And Anthropic's internal testing was apparently so shocking that they made a massive corporate decision. They publicly stated that Mythos poses such an extreme, asymmetrical cybersecurity risk to global infrastructure that they absolutely refuse to release the model or its API to the public.
Instead, they have locked it down. They are utilizing a strict defense-in-depth strategy. They are restricting access to a tightly controlled, highly vetted list of just 40 major global tech and cybersecurity companies.
We're talking about the absolute titans: Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, massive defense contractors.
These 40 companies are allowed to use Claude Mythos strictly defensively. They're feeding their own proprietary software into Mythos, letting the AI find all the hidden 0 days, and then frantically patching those holes before human adversaries or rogue states can find them.
Pause for a second and really think about the implications of this. Imagine knowing there's an artificial intelligence sitting on a server right now that acts as a universal digital skeleton key, mathematically capable of cracking almost any software on Earth. How does that make you feel about the security of your bank account, the software running your car's brakes, or the encrypted messages on your phone?
It is deeply chilling, because the reality of the tech industry is that there are no permanent secrets. If Anthropic's engineers have the architectural blueprint to build this, it is only a matter of time, maybe months, maybe a year, before an adversary or a rogue state or an open source collective builds a structurally similar model without any of the corporate safety guardrails.
It's an arms race. The only defense against a malicious AI finding 0 days is having a benevolent AI find them and patch them first. It is straight out of a William Gibson sci-fi novel.
And while we are discussing actual science fiction becoming reality, we have to talk about what is happening roughly 240,000 miles above our heads right now, because the Artemis II mission is currently flying.
This is a monumental milestone for human engineering. 4 astronauts, 3 Americans and 1 Canadian, are currently strapped into the Orion spacecraft on a 10-day journey around the moon and back.
It is the first crewed flight to leave low Earth orbit and travel into deep space since the Apollo 17 mission ended in 1972.
Over 50 years. And the mechanics of the flight are incredible. They aren't landing on the moon, they are executing a free return trajectory. They use the moon's gravity as a massive slingshot to whip them back toward Earth.
And they are already sending back these incredibly striking Earth-set photos. They are perfectly channeling the iconic Apollo 8 images from 1968, where you see the desolate, gray curve of the lunar surface in the foreground and this fragile, bright blue marble suspended in the black void of space.
It is a vital proof-of-concept mission to test the life support systems against deep space radiation before we attempt to land humans back on the surface for Artemis III.
It is humanity pushing the absolute boundaries of physics. But back down on Earth, scientists are pushing the boundaries of biology in a way that sounds completely absurd. Researchers have successfully genetically engineered tobacco plants to produce psychedelics.
Which sounds like the punchline to a joke, but the biological mechanics behind it are actually brilliant.
I couldn't believe this when I read it. They actively altered the genetics of a standard tobacco plant so that it functions as a biological factory, simultaneously producing 5 different psychedelic compounds, including psilocybin and psilocin.
Let's explain how they do this, because it's a process called metabolic engineering. They use a specific bacterium called Agrobacterium tumefaciens. In nature, this bacteria causes tumors in plants by inserting its own DNA into the plant's genome.
So the scientists hijack the hijacker.
Exactly. They replace the tumor-causing genes in the bacteria with the genetic instructions for making psychedelic compounds. The bacteria infects the tobacco plant, rewrites its DNA, and suddenly, the tobacco plant's internal metabolic pathways start synthesizing complex hallucinogens in its leaves.
But why? Why turn a tobacco plant into a psychedelic dispensary?
Because synthesizing these highly complex chemical compounds from scratch in a traditional pharmaceutical laboratory is incredibly difficult, slow, and staggeringly expensive.
Oh, so the plant does the heavy lifting for free.
Yeah. By using agricultural infrastructure, literally just sunlight, water, and soil, they can harvest the tobacco leaves and extract massive quantities of these medicinal compounds.
It completely scales up the production, which is crucial because these psychedelics are currently at the forefront of revolutionary FDA clinical trials for treating severe depression and treatment-resistant PTSD.
So we have mind-bending AI vulnerability scanners, astronauts slingshotting around the moon, and genetically hijacked psychedelic tobacco.
Whoa.
Let's ground this massive global docket with America's pastime, because even the dirt and grass of Major League Baseball has been fully digitized. Baseball just made history with robots.
It finally happened. We witnessed the first ever game-ending call made by a robot umpire.
The mechanics of the game have fundamentally changed. This happened in a high-stakes matchup between the Baltimore Orioles and the Texas Rangers. The league is utilizing the automated ball strike system, which relies on Hawkeye optical tracking cameras positioned all around the stadium.
These cameras track the ball at over 100 frames per second, creating a perfect three-dimensional digital strike zone over home plate that adjusts dynamically to the height of the specific batter.
Bottom of the ninth inning. Full count. The pitch comes in. The human umpire behind the plate doesn't make the call.
Right. The optical system tracks the trajectory, mathematically confirms it clipped the 3D strike zone, and relays the data to an earpiece. The automated system makes the final strike call, completely removing human error, giving Orioles pitcher Albert Suarez a game-ending save in an 8-3 victory.
A computerized algorithm literally calling the final out of a Major League Baseball game. The human element of judgment is slowly being engineered out of the process.
The future is absolutely here, and it leaves us with one terrifying, overarching question as we wrap up today's massive breakdown.
We just spent an hour connecting these incredible dots. We talked about Iranian hackers actively exploiting physical PLCs to target U.S. water grids. We talked about algorithmic trading instantly wiping billions of dollars off the commodities market.
And now we know there's an artificial intelligence out there, Claude Mythos, that can act as a flawless digital skeleton key to find any software vulnerability instantly. What happens when the state-sponsored hackers attacking those water grids get their hands on a model like that? The next World War isn't going to be fought with physical bombers targeting concrete bridges and power plants. It is going to be fought entirely in the code.
When the foundational infrastructure that keeps our cities alive, our water, our electricity, our banking, can be turned off with a synthesized keystroke, the threat of a kinetic airstrike almost feels quaint. The digital battlefield is completely invisible, and the terrifying reality is that it is already highly active.
All right, if we made your drive, your workout, or your downtime even a little bit better today, do us a massive favor. Whether you are watching on YouTube, streaming on Spotify, listening on Apple Podcasts, or literally anywhere else, hit that follow or subscribe button right now. We drop episodes like this every single day, bringing you the world's news in the most interesting way possible. Lock in because you do not want to miss the crazy stories we have queued up for tomorrow.